Now, as mentioned, the index also looks at state policy efforts. In order to focus attention on what's needed to adequately prepare, support, and compensate the early childhood workforce, we came up with what we call the 5 essential elements of early childhood workforce policy: qualification requirements, work environments and supports, such as paid planning time, which in our first edition of the index we look at in relation to QRIS standards, compensation strategies, financial resources, specifically state efforts to marshal funds for ECE, and then lastly, workforce data. Now, the reason we chose these 5 elements in particular is because for qualifications, we know that adequate preparation and access to foundational knowledge is necessary for teachers to develop the skills to provide high-quality learning experiences. We also know that workplace supports, such as paid planning time and paid time for professional development, are needed to ensure ongoing reflection, development, and educator well-being in the workplace. And we focus on compensation strategies because adequate pay and some measure of economic security are indispensable if we want to attract and retain skilled educators. Additionally, making progress in each of these 3 key areas requires building solid foundations for these policies by first securing sufficient financial resources, and second, collecting quality, comprehensive workforce data in order to be able to test the effectiveness of policies and to ensure the good use of public dollars. And so within the index, we devised a series of measurable indicators, things that we could look at across all 50 states and DC, and then within each of these essential elements. And then depending on where states fall along these indicators, they receive an overall assessment of stalled, edging forward, or making headway for each element. And the overall takeaway is that state policies are out of line with research recommendations on what it takes to adequately support the early childhood workforce. And although we looked at only whether states had policies in place and not at the success of implementation or the impact of these policies, and although we set indicators often at less than what might be considered ideal policies, still no state was making headway or the highest tier for all 5 elements of early childhood workforce policy. And barely half the states were making headway in any of the essential elements, meaning that there's room for improvement in every state. Now, as an example, our first policy element was qualification requirements. Each state sets their own qualification standards for early educators, and minimum requirements vary widely, not only across states, but within states, according to setting and source of funding. States have been making greater progress toward raising educational requirements for publicly funded pre-K teachers serving children aged 3 to 4, particularly those working in public schools. But they still lag far behind in minimum requirements for early educators working outside the public pre-K system. Of the 44 states, including DC, and remember that this is based on 2016 data collection, with public pre-K programs at the time of our data collection, 23 required a minimum of a bachelor's degree for teachers, regardless of setting. An additional 14 states required a bachelor's for some pre-K teachers in certain types of programs or settings, most often those in public schools only. But 7 states didn't require a bachelor's degree for any pre-K teachers. And these uneven qualifications are in sharp contrast to the standard requirement of a BA and licensure for K-3 teachers across states. For early educators working outside the pre-K system, only 11 states set a minimum requirement of at least a Child Development Associate credential or completion of a substantive vocational program within their licensing requirements. Most states require only a high school diploma. Moreover, too many states require nothing at all. 10 states have no requirements for teaching staff in centers, and 23 states have no requirements for home-based settings with 2 or more providers. And so we know that this variation in educational requirements results in great inequities for children. For example, in different states, sometimes even within the same state, 4-year-olds who are eligible to attend a publicly subsidized early childhood program may be taught by someone with the equivalent of a master's degree or by a teacher with no college background at all. In terms of the index, states which met both of these indicators, a minimum of a bachelor's degree for lead pre-K teachers and at least a CDA or equivalent for all licensed providers, were assessed at the highest tier, making headway. And so as you can see here, only 5 states are at that top tier in green. 24 states met the criteria for one but not both, which is yellow or edging forward, and then the rest, nearly half, met neither indicator. And as before, if you visit our website, you can click to view individual state information. And yet, minimum qualification requirements is actually a policy element where states have made more progress relative to some other areas that we track in the index. Where we're doing less well is with regard to work environments, financial resources, and especially compensation strategies.